Alright, howdy folks, welcome back to the channel and welcome back to Men of War 2. Today we're taking a look at every single unit, cannon, vehicle, aircraft, ship, you name it, inside Men of War 2 as of 2-ish weeks after game's release. This is going to be similar to the Gates of Hell video I did when a Liberation DLC released. With that said, we have a lot to cover, from aircraft to ships to light tanks and medium tanks. As you can see, the map is quite full. Now if you're wondering how I did this, I just went into the editor and then I just put literally everything down in the editor. So people were asking me that in the Liberation DLC. That's how I did this one. At the top of every category here, the aircraft, you'll have the American lineup, in the middle the Soviet lineup, and at the bottom the German lineup. The Americans have an A-20G, a glider, as well as a paratrooper transporter, grasshopper, recon, and 2 types of P-51, one with rockets and one with bombs. The Soviets have this rather archaic I-16 as their fighter/rocketer, an IL-I-2, which is a license-built version and copy of the American C-47, 2 types of IL-2s, one which is predominantly a bomber, and this other one has 2 NS-37 anti-tank cannons, which are actually pretty effective as long as your target is absolutely completely stationary, and a PO2 as a recon plane. Last but not least, the Germans have a Bf-109 G16, which again kind of showcases just how much of a era difference there is between the I-16 and the 109, a Stork recon, a Ju-52 for paratrooping operations, and 2 Stukas, again one here with the 37mm cannons on it. This one is pretty similar to the Soviet IL-2 with the NS-37s, which is a pretty good and effective tank buster as long as the enemy tank is basically completely stationary. So I really prefer to use the bombing runs whenever I can. Moving on from the aircraft, which you'll see relatively often in Men of War, even single player, multiplayer co-op, the boats, which I haven't even seen much of, but they're in the game, so I figured I would showcase them anyway. A couple of dinghies, a flak barge with 2 quads and a flak 88, a couple of transports, a little LVCP landing ship, a tiny little motorboat, which actually is pretty recognizable, I think, as I've seen this in Assault Squad 1 and 2 before. Then a sort of sloop, more of a supporting ship, which actually does carry these crazy rocket launchers. And last but not least, a tiny little motorboat. But again, this is just to showcase that they're in the game. I have not really seen these. I'm assuming, again, they're more there for mission makers to use or for some single player scenarios, but don't expect to see these in a multiplayer game. Moving on to the car category, again reiterating, the top is American, the middle is Soviet, and the bottom is German, with some extra civilian stuff here we'll take a look at as well. For the Americans, we have some GMC trucks in transport or fuel transport variants, some Willys Jeeps, as well as WC-51 cars, including ones with a 37mm cannon here on the back and a 30 cal in the front, another transport for fuel, and then some more Willys Jeeps, armored, unarmored, with a maximum of 50 cal, or even this one with the twin bazooka, and last but not least, an armed Harley-Davidson motorbike. As you can see, the Soviets have a pretty equivalent sort of variants of trucks with fuel transporting or just transporting infantry. However, where the Americans have the Willys Jeep, the Soviets have a 76mm gun, of course the famous Katyusha, as well as a triple barrel 50 caliber anti-aircraft weapon system, a bunch of Jeeps including one with a machine gun, a fuel transporter, a medical truck, as well as a motorbike. And then for the Germans, pretty similar, a bunch of Opel Blitzes in different setups, the Kettenkrad, which is a motorbike half-track, the Kubelwagen with the machine gun, Opel Blitz with a medical, as well as a fuel transporter. This one is honestly one of my favorites, an Opel Blitz with 4 side-mounted and obviously 0 armor machine guns, but this is kind of a gangster truck or gangster mobile, and of course a BMW motorcycle with a machine gun on it. And then finally, some of the civilian or extra prop stuff you might see on the maps. This pretty good looking tractor, this absolutely like 2003 looking monstrosity. I don't even think the wheels are round, a horse and a double horse. And yes, these guys aren't really listening. This isn't something, again, you'll see a lot of use with or on, but I just figured since it's in the game, might as well showcase it to you because, hey, you might see it in a mission or something. After the car category, we'll take a look at the BTR category. In the game, at least, called the BTR category. I'm pretty sure these are just armored vehicles. They can be tracked, they can be wheeled, they can be half tracks. As long as they have any sort of armor, they belong in this category. The Americans have a whole slew of half-tracks, including some of these artillery tractors, but also half-tracks like the famous M16 with its quad 50, once with a cannon on the back, the M20 armored scout car, some more half-tracks, some with 50, sometimes with 30 cals. Of course, the scout car, which has wheels and no tracks, the M8 Greyhound. A actual interesting thing here is the Bren carrier, which you might expect to see in the British tree, but since there's no Brits in the game as of right now, they are currently under the American faction with both a 50 cal here or a 30 cal here. The Soviets used a lot of Lend-Lease equipment throughout World War II, which was equipment leased to them by the Americans and the British. Here we have some half-tracks, including even their 50 caliber and 30 caliber machine guns, the BA-11, BA-20, and BA-64 armored cars, some more American half-tracks, and a scout car, as well as an artillery tractor, which looks like it kind of belongs inside of the Cars movie with its mouth and its two eyes here, and the T-20 Komsomolets in two different variants with or without a tent. Moving on to the German armored vehicles and half-tracks, and they had a lot of variants, so the Germans have by far the most in Men of War 2. Actually, ironically though, we're starting off with an Italian one, this AB-41, most likely captured by the Germans and put into their service sometime after the Italian capitulation in 1943. We have some 221s as well as 222s with machine guns, 20mm cannons, or a 28mm squeeze-bore anti-tank rifle, a couple of older as well as newer armored vehicles with the 8-wheel system, here the Puma, as well as the 232, and then we have, of course, some half-tracks and a whole bunch of variations from 37mm cannons with sight-mounted machine guns, flamethrowers, 20mm cannons, 75mm pack guns, light 75mm short-barrel howitzers, just regular transport variants, a different bunch of 251s, sometimes with a mortar, sometimes with machine guns, a Panzerwerfer, which is a Nebelwerfer on the back of a half-track, a quad 20mm on the back of a 7-1, and an artillery tractor for those really heavy guns to be towed in the Soviet winter. Of course, Men of War 2 has a absolute insane amount of cannons and stationary guns, machine guns, mortars. Let's just take a look at them all in a quick fashion. Again, starting off with the Americans, and also keep in mind, I have made some of these a lot bigger to be more easily seen in this video. So no, this mortar or machine gun is not the size of a Bofors anti-aircraft gun. We have some bigger howitzers, some anti-tank guns, some stationary 50 cals, smaller howitzers, bigger howitzers, anti-aircraft guns, this 3.5-inch anti-aircraft gun. We have smaller AT guns, the famous 76mm AT gun, M8 howitzer, and of course, last but not least, the American quad 50 cal Maxim AA gun. A quick look at the Soviet static weapons, of course, mortars, machine guns, field guns, light anti-tank guns, 85mm anti-aircraft guns, giant howitzers and artillery pieces, the BS-3 100mm gun, Dishkas as well, and of course, the famous, very terrifying, though kind of weird looking texture-wise here, the quad Maxim, and more guns like the ZIS-2 and the ZIS-3. Of course, I've enlarged some of the German equipment as well, like their machine guns, their mortars. As you can see, this is not a true-to-life size between its Flak 88 or Nebelwerfer and this 12cm mortar. Some more Flaks, some 20 mils, some 37 mils. We have some 105 howitzers, the light infantry Geschütz, the LG-40 airborne gun, a couple of different variants of these MGs. Some are, I think, more meant to be inside bunkers. We have MG-42s, MG-34s. This is a 280mm Nebelwerfer, some pack guns, some Soviet guns pressed into German service here like this one, as well as a Czech gun, the Pak 40, Pak 38, Pak 36, Pak 43, and a whole bunch of artillery pieces, including the 21cm howitzer. Last but not least, there are a few technically civilian things that you may or may not see in the game, which includes this naval gun, searchlights, as well as this periscope. And I just wanted to put this little welding device in the video because technically you'd have a guy pull this, but I'm not really sure what the point is. And of course, the field kitchen cannot be missing from Men of War 2. Moving on to the light tanks in Men of War 2. Again, same Americans up top, Soviets in the middle, and the Germans at the bottom. And I believe light tanks here is kind of based on their armor or their armor thickness. And as you can see, there is a Goliath in here. And no, that's not the size of the Goliath. I've just made it a little bigger so it's easier to see in this screen. For the Americans, we have two types of LVT, one with a 37mm cannon and one with a small howitzer. The M18 Hellcat tank destroyer, an anti-aircraft SPG. We have a Chaffee, a couple of Stuart variants, as well as the M8 Scott, which is basically a Stuart with a small assault gun. For the Soviets, we have the BT-7 as well as the BT-7A, which has a howitzer, a flamethrower tank, Stuart, Su-76, Stuart, of course, Lend-Lease, some T-26s, some T-40s, T-60s, T-70s, the ZIS-30, and the ZSU SPG anti-aircraft. The Germans in MoW 2 have a whole bunch of light tanks, and they're not actually all German, like this BT-7 Beutepanzer in German service, this Italian M1542, again in German service, the Goliath remote control bomb, again made bigger to make it a little bit more obvious in here, this Jagdpanzer 38, also known as the Hetzer, as well as Marder 2 and Marder 3 tank destroyers, Flak Panzer 1, Panzer 1, Panzer 1C, a bunch of different variants of the Panzer 2, the Panzer 2H, which is armed with a 50mm gun, the Panzer II Lux, and then of course the Panzer 35 and Panzer 38 from Czechoslovakian designs, the Panzerjäger 1, a Wesp artillery, and one of my favorite units, the Bison, which is a 150mm SIG or Schweres Infanteriegeschütz on the back of a Panzer I chassis with a little bit of armor, a very destructive gun, but don't take any return fire because this thing cannot take it. The medium tank category is quite big. As you can see, it kind of barely fits on the screen before the sort of fog cutoff. Again, let's start off with the Americans. Of course, when you think about American medium tanks during World War II, you think of like every Sherman variant possible, and there's quite a few in Men of War 2. The M4A1 here, as well as the M4 Sherman DD, or duplex drive, or Donald Duck. And long story short, these were meant to be sort of amphibious tanks that could float their way from a landing ship off of the D-Day beaches onto the beach and then immediately support the infantry. The Wolverine, the M12 howitzer, the M2 medium tank, the 19mm armed slugger tank destroyer, the M3 Lee, the M4A3 series here with the 105 howitzer, here a regular 75, a Crocodile flamethrower, which is a coaxial flamethrower next to the main gun. Here you have the Calliope rocket launcher. An interesting thing here is that crews were allegedly not supposed to use the main gun, but it did happen from time to time. Then we have the Sherman 75 Jumbo and the Sherman 76 Jumbo, which are just very heavily up-armored variants of the Sherman tanks. Two sets of the M4A3E8. So here, this is a slightly different camo, kind of almost reminds me of the Fury tank. A Sherman with the Crab mine flail, and these things would go crazy. And the point was that they would hit the ground, it would hopefully cause mines to explode, as well as a M4A4 and a M7 Priest. When you think of American medium tanks, you think of the Sherman. When you think of Soviet medium tanks, you think of the T-34 and a whole bunch of different variants. However, they also have some American Lend-Lease equipment, again, some Shermans, the OT-T-34 with a flamethrower in the hull machine gun position, a Panzer III, also called the T-3 in Soviet service, the Su-85, Su-100, and Su-122s. Then we have the T-28 and T-28E, with E being the up-armored version, some more T-34s, some more T-34s, some T-34-85s, including ones with this anti-Panzerfaust anti-heat protection system. The idea being that during the Battle of Berlin mostly, the Soviets were so worried about their tanks being knocked out by these anti-tank Panzerfausts, as well as this beautiful T-34E, which is an up-armored version. I don't know if it was very effective, but I always really liked the look of these. Then we have a T-34 with a mine clearer and a Valentine Lend-Lease tank. The German medium category has a lot of vehicles as well. Here, the Hummel self-propelled gun, 150mm one, the Panzer IV F2, Panzer IV-G, the Jagdpanther tank destroyer, as well as three variants of the Jagdpanzer tank destroyer. These two are obviously different in terms of guns. However, this one is similar to the 470. However, this one's called Der Vector, which I'm pretty sure means the guard or guardian. Then we have a Nashorn, 88mm Pak 43, similar-ish type of gun to what you'd see on the King Tiger and the Jagdpanther, some Panzer III variants, as well as a Panzer III mine clearer, which is obviously the least effective of the three nations, considering the Americans get a Sherman version, the Soviets get a T-34 version. This one doesn't really get much besides maybe some smoke launchers, a Panzer III and short barrel, a Panzer IV, a Panzer IV short barrel, a Panzer IV-H, a whole bunch of Panther variants, again, with a slightly different camo scheme. So I put these down, but they are very similar, as in they're pretty much the same. This one has a flag on the back and a slightly different camo scheme. Another Panther. Then we have some of the Sturmgeschütz variants, the Stug 3 with the short barrel, the Stug 3 with the long barrel, a Stug 3 with the long barrel and the side skirts, and then of course the Stug 4, which which is based on the Panzer IV chassis with that 75mm and side skirts, as well as a 105mm Stu-42. And then last but not least, the Germans have the Wirbelwind for anti-aircraft duties, though I wouldn't be surprised if we'd see the Ostwind at some point as well, which is very similar to this. It's a Panzer IV chassis, but instead of a quad 20, the Ostwind has a single 37mm gun. And then last but not least, the heavy category, where as you can see the Soviets have a whole bunch more than the Americans and the Germans combined. Starting off with the Americans, there are only 4 heavy tanks: the Pershing, the Super Pershing, this prototype T-29, as well as the T-95 Doom Turtle. Now the T-29 is a little bit confusing to me. The model is definitely not up to par with the rest of the models in the game, so especially looking at the tracks. So I'm not really sure if this is a holdover asset or if it's going to be something that they're going to rework, but I just wanted to put it down because it's an active unit you can get in the editor, but it definitely doesn't really hold up in terms of graphics. If you can compare the tracks between these two and move them together, yeah, that's obviously very telling. Of course, the Soviets have a whole bunch of their IS tanks, so this IS-1 with an 85mm gun, a couple of different IS-2s from different time periods, and of course the Pike Nose IS-3. Then moving on, we have the ISU-122 and the ISU-152. The KV-1 in sort of 2 variants. This is just a slightly different looking one, similar to the Yak Panzer IV Vector and the regular variant it was next to. Then we have the KV with a longer barrel gun. We have the KV-1E, which has extra armor, much like the T-34E. The KV-1S, the KV-2 with its famous 152mm howitzer. The KV-8, which has a flamethrower coaxial. But what makes this interesting is that the Soviets didn't want the Germans to know which of their tanks was a flamethrower tank, so they kept the 76mm barrel on the outside that was supposed to be on the KV-1, but on the inside of this barrel, they would actually only have a 45mm cannon because the inside of the turret couldn't have both the flamethrower and that bigger 76mm gun. Then the KV-85, a Churchill 3 again through Lend-Lease, an Su-152, and the T-35 land battleship. Finally, for the German heavy lineup, we have the Sturmpanzer IV Brummbär, which is a Panzer IV chassis with a 150mm assault gun in it. The German Ferdinand tank destroyer, this one does not come with the machine gun. That was something that would be put on the Elephant going forward. The Jagd Tiger tank destroyer with a 12.8cm gun, 2 variants of the Tiger II with the P and H turrets. Then we have 2 variants of the Tiger I, the E and the H, as well as the French B2 pushed into German service. And then last but not least, the 380mm rocket armed Sturmtiger, and this one in Men of War 2 is pretty freaking deadly. That concludes our look at every single aircraft, ship, cannon, vehicle, and everything in between in Men of War 2 as of 2 weeks after the release. I cannot wait for them to hopefully add more nations, so I could at some point do another overview video where we'll take a look at, say, a British or Japanese or whatever faction. Actually, maybe let me know down in the comments what faction you'd like to see in Men of War 2. Hope you enjoyed, and I'll catch you in the next one.